Fill your plates with produce, plants, proteins. If you want some animal proteins, dairy proteins, don't be afraid of carbohydrates. They provide good energy. They have good sources of fiber and nutrition. And don't avoid sugar entirely. Sugar is something that I'm certainly not going to say is healthy for us, but it's not toxic. It's not going to kill you unless you are eating excessive amounts every day. Well, there are people that don't need to have sweets, but you have to have some joy from food as well. And I never would advocate for people to give up things and foods that they really like. So it really is moderation, and it's just balance between all three macronutrients.
Welcome to Build Beyond, a podcast designed to challenge and guide you on your health journey so that you can meet your full potential. Thanks for tuning in to episode 27 of the Build Beyond podcast. I'm recording this brief intro to give you a little bit of background information. I'm excited to announce that this is the first podcast episode that we have recorded with two people in the same room. Typically, we record virtually. As such, there are technical difficulties that we have to overcome when we're recording with people who are in close proximity, specifically with our microphones. Denise and I figured it out, although it was difficult not to get any mic bleed or feedback. Because of that, the transitions are a little bit awkward and the editing had to get a little bit creative. But I think the audio turned out pretty good. I'm really happy with it. I did accidentally cut off Denise at the end during her conclusion. I accidentally muted her mic, so we lost all of that audio, unfortunately. So you're not going to get that at the end. It does end a little bit abruptly. So if you make it all the way to the end of the podcast, that's what happened. I'll add a little closing comment to the end of it as well. Also, the video on my camera is terrible. I knew that was going to be a problem because I was recording with a window in the background. I didn't realize it was going to turn out so bad. I actually had a better camera on me, but the lighting just did not work out. Denise's lighting looks great though. So I hope if you're watching this, I hope that you enjoy that as well. And I'll try and do better next time. As I said, recording it with two people in the same room is a new challenge for us. And I'm excited about the way this one turned out. And I know that you're going to enjoy this discussion. So without further ado, here you go. All right.
Okay.
What are we talking about?
All right. So today, Chris and I wanted to talk to all of you about back to basics nutrition. We want to talk about carbohydrates, proteins, fats, a couple of micronutrients, fiber. It just seems like it's very confusing out there in the social media world and internet world, and well-meaning friends and family giving you nutrition advice. And I hear on a daily basis that people do not know what they should be eating. So I thought we would just go back to scratch today, talk about what these different nutrients do in our body, how we can work them into our diet, and how they can make us a little bit healthier and help prevent disease.
So when I work with people with nutrition, I usually I give them a choice. We're going to start with protein or fiber. So I feel like that's, for me, the easiest thing to do because it's the biggest bang for your buck. And usually people want to start with protein, which really isn't that hard. And it's mostly just when I have people track their protein, most people are already eating enough. I've never seen a protein deficiency. But for people who are starting to get into strength training, usually we can pump that up a little bit. Also, for people who are most people want to lose a little bit of weight. So that's a nice thing about starting with protein and fiber is that we can jack those up. And those foods tend to be higher in nutrients and then more filling, so lower in calories, less processing. So the shift tends to be really good. But where do you like to start? Does it matter, or do you kind of have a set thing that you like to do?
I start exactly in the same spot with protein and fiber. And I work with a lot of people in the healthcare field, people who already have chronic disease, who have diabetes, have heart disease, trying to lose weight and have been their entire life. And I will tell you, in the population of people I see, most of them are not eating enough protein. And that is definitely where I start, especially with the women I see. Most women I see are not eating protein at lunch. They're having cereal or toast for breakfast. and it's very difficult for some of them to get adequate protein. But I start with protein because we know protein keeps us full, keeps us satisfied. We know if we are going to do some strength training programs or exercise, we need a little bit more protein. Postmenopausal women need almost as much protein as athletes do. So we know that we need to pump up that protein for that age group. And then protein does have that thermic effect of food, which isn't significant. However, it takes more calories to burn protein than carbohydrate or fat. So just by eating adequate protein, you're probably burning a little bit more than 100, 150 calories a day. And just so people understand why protein is important, is muscle mass determines how many calories we burn. So as we get older, we may be talking to some individuals in my age group, we begin losing 2 to 3% of our muscle mass each decade. And if we're not eating adequate protein to keep that muscle mass intact, that's going to make us weak. It's going to have us open to falls, and it's also going to have us open to weight gain because our bodies no longer are burning calories very efficiently. So I always start with protein first, and then I do talk about fiber, and that's something we could talk a little bit about as well.
So with protein, that gets us into some hot topics as far as where the sources of the protein. And I don't know, I think I know how you address it. And I address it is I don't care. If someone's not eating, if we're trying to improve someone's diet and I think they need more protein, however they want to get it. Now, if they have a history of heart disease or we're worried about anything like that, I obviously am going to make some other recommendations. But for most people, I think it's interesting because we can double dip with the protein and the fiber, because a lot of plant sources of protein that are high in fiber are also high in protein, which is kind of nice. And they taste kind of good. You know, and adding some more beans and rice usually is, it's kind of comfort food. And I think a lot of people don't think about those foods as potentially healthy. But what I found is that we can get really creative when we add in protein, and it can be kind of good. You know, yogurt tastes really good. And if you get zero fat yogurt, there's more protein in it for some reason. And protein powders can be affordable and tasty. But how do you take someone who says, I don't want to eat more protein, I don't think I can, and how do you get them to at least try or be open to the possibility of eating more protein?
We talk about the reasons that protein is so important, especially if someone's hearing to lose weight. If I'm working with someone that has diabetes, we know that protein also can help reduce that blood sugar increase after meals, which again is something I want to talk about a little bit later. But I show them different ways to do it. Just like you are saying, I teach them how to combine different amounts of foods that have small amounts of protein so that they're getting adequate protein at their meals. We'll talk about recipes and how they can do this. We talk about adding seeds and nuts to things. And like you said, making things tasty, having that Greek yogurt and putting some delicious fruit on it, but also adding some hemp seeds or flax seeds that have a little extra protein, maybe mixing almond butter in there to give you a little extra protein and fat. So I just try to get them to see the benefits and then work with the foods that I know they like and how they can add other things to it. And I really am talking more and more with my patients that have insulin resistance or a history of insulin resistance in their family about moving to more plant-based proteins. The research is pretty clear that that type of protein is a little bit more beneficial just because of what you said. There's added fiber and other nutrients and antioxidants in those foods that help our insulin resistance and can actually reduce insulin resistance.
I think when someone comes in and you haven't even started asking them any specific questions, there's probably going to be some things that they would say that would tip you off that maybe they're not eating an adequate amount of protein. Is there anything, because people listening or watching this may be wondering, okay, maybe I don't have enough, maybe I'm not eating enough protein. And hopefully they'll be, enticed to check it out, because it's kind of an easy thing to do. You can just get a piece of paper and put it on your counter. And every time you eat something that you think might have protein in it, just write it down, and you could write fistful size of whatever, and then Google it at some point, and you can kind of just get a rough estimate. But there's going to be some signs and symptoms. And I think at the extreme, you have what we picture, I think the videos of kids in Africa with the distended bellies. So, or, it's like severe protein deficiencies, which is not something we typically see in the United States. But for communities like ours, when people are low in protein, what are they feeling and how does that look?
So the first thing that I probably see is fatigue. Lots of times when I ask people, why are you here to see me? That will be one of the first things they say. I'm fatigued. I am tired all the time. A lot of times it is people that are only eating once or twice a day. It's pretty difficult to get and meet your protein needs in 1 or 2 meals a day. So if people tell me they're only eating once or twice a day, I already know there's going to be a problem with protein. So those are a couple of the things that kind of clue me in. And as we start talking more and figuring out what they're actually eating, I would say, again, and a lot of older people that I see, and by older, I mean over 65, in my generation, all grew up at a time when 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein was what you needed, which is about 6 ounces of meat for some people each day. And so they've never eaten a lot of protein, and they grew up eating cereal for breakfast. They grew up maybe having a couple of slices of lunch meat on a sandwich, or they are retired, widowed, don't like to cook anymore. So they're not cooking meat. They're heating up bowls of soup. They're heating up a grilled cheese sandwich. So when someone tells me they don't like to cook, I almost feel like, okay, you're probably not getting enough protein, because people don't realize how easy it is to get in cottage cheese or Greek yogurt, or whole wheat pasta has protein, whole wheat bread has protein. And when you start telling them that, oh, I thought I just had to eat beef. A lot of times that's what people think. So I just think educating, just like you're saying, it is so easy to figure out how much protein you have. And we can put some information in the show notes for people if they want.
A really high protein breakfast that I love, and now my daughter's getting into, is Greek yogurt, peanut butter, and protein powder. And I have this really tasty chocolate whey protein powder. So it's a chocolate peanut butter, and sometimes I'll put in, if you take frozen blueberries and you heat them up, they get a little cooked and warm, and you put those on top, and then you have the sweetness to it. It's like a peanut butter and jelly thing, but the protein is ridiculous, because I think one serving of Greek yogurt, 0 fat, is like 17 grams of protein. And then if you put a full scoop of protein powder in, now you're at 37 grams of protein. And peanut butter is ridiculously high in protein, it's odd. And a serving size of peanut butter is actually a pretty big scoop of peanut butter. And I think you're up at like 8 grams of protein there. So you're talking about probably more protein than I can metabolize in one sitting, but it keeps you full for hours. And calorically, it's not really that high. I mean, it's not as much as you would think, and but it's delicious. So when people are like, "Oh, I can't eat," or I don't know, they're thinking I don't like protein, and they're picturing something else. And then I say that, which is essentially a breakfast dessert in a way. It kind of changes their attitude a little bit.
That's actually something that I recommend, and I eat a lot as well. And the protein amounts for people, that's a large amount of protein, which is fantastic, but it doesn't even have to be that much. 20 to 30 grams per meal is a really great place to start. And that, what you've discussed, probably has 35 to 40 grams, which is great. And you're someone who lifts weights, and you probably need that much protein. But that 20 to 30 is a great place to start. But you said one of the most important things about protein is how satiating it is. Keeps you full, and it gives you that energy. And what I see with my patients who tell me they're fatigued, once they're eating protein with a little bit of carbohydrate at the same time, they can't believe how much better they feel and how much their energy is. But that breakfast is a delicious thing. And it's exactly what I recommend and it's what I eat often too. And my patients just love that. So there's a lot of savory or kind of sweet things that you can make with protein. So thanks for sharing that. It's a good one.
And I've told that to several people, and there are people who pick it apart too, because it's not stereotypically healthy, especially the peanut butter and sometimes I will put jelly in if I don't have frozen. And so it's not what you would think of, but it's one of those things because I prioritize protein. So I know I'm getting the protein that I need, maybe even a little extra that I can't metabolize. But for me, it means that I won't snack later. And that's because I know that I'm going to be full. And that if I have a craving at work, it's not because I'm hungry or I need food. It's just I want it. But if I crave it and I want it and I have an actual sensation of hunger because I skipped breakfast, it's really hard walking past that office with the donuts or the scones. And so I would agree with some people to say that like the breakfast that I eat sometimes may not be the ideal healthy breakfast, but with 2 little kids and no time on my hands and something I've got to have fast, I'm going to prioritize protein, and then I'm going to feel good about the fact that I'm not going to need to eat a snack unless I bring something that I intentionally want to eat. Now, the interesting thing about protein from what's going on in society right now is that we see protein intakes now also on the extreme other end, where people are predominantly eating protein, actually restricting carbohydrates. So you've got keto and carnivore diets now that are becoming or have been popular for a while and are still around. So how do you balance that? Because you have these patients who don't like protein or eating too low, but I imagine people are coming in and they're predominantly living on protein. So what does that look like?
So often what I see with that, unfortunately, is many are eating unhealthy proteins. And what the unhealthy proteins that I just put out there are processed meats. There's just been recent evidence that we know that processed meats, but that sausage, pepperoni, salami, cheese, bacon, hot dogs, we know without a doubt they cause cardiovascular disease, and they are considered a carcinogenic now as well. Some new research has popped up. So I see them eating a lot of that. And if somebody wants to be on a low carb, keto, or carnivore diet, what I would always encourage them is to eat good quality protein. Meat, a lot of them don't eat dairy products, but dairy products can be very good quality protein, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, those types of things. And I try to get them to include a little bit of fiber somewhere. Usually on the carnivore diet, they'll eat berries, they might eat some mixed greens, but people often don't like vegetables. And I will say a lot of the people I see on these low carb, high protein diets don't eat any fruit or vegetables. So then we have constipation problems, we have high cholesterol levels, high LDL levels. So we have to be very careful about balancing it. And I'm glad to work with people, but I try to get them to eat proteins that are good for them and good for their hearts, and try to get them to include a little bit of fiber, either in the form of seeds or nuts, or in the form of some veggies, or a little bit of lower carbohydrate fruits, because I know that that's what they'll eat. But I think it's a concern for people that are just on social media now, not following a carnivore diet or a low carb diet. They have thin young women telling them they need to eat 200 grams of protein a day. Or I saw one the other day suggesting this is how I got 145 grams of protein at breakfast, which is pretty ridiculous. You know, the typical person does not need that much protein. Some of the football players I see do not need 200 grams of protein a day. So it does need to be balanced. And I think a nice balance for everyone to start is somewhere around 20 to 30 per meal. Most people who are working out need much more than that, but it's a good place for people to start. Most postmenopausal women need more than that, but that's a really good place to start so you don't feel overwhelmed.
The carnivore diet's interesting. I think in comparison to what people usually eat before they switch to that diet, so like a standard American diet, it's awesome. If someone's like, hey, I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to eat carnivore, great. You're probably going to lose a ton of weight. You're choosing high quality, you're going to choose higher quality foods. It's going to be exponentially better than what you're doing. The interesting thing and the problem that I have with carnivore diet, and this is the problem I have a lot of diets, is the marketing used, the scare tactics. It's not usually they'll talk about, yeah, it's good, but then they'll look at the alternatives and it'll be like the big red X, and you're destroying yourself, and this is all the terrible things. So it's like, if you're not eating like this, you're not eating like your ancestors did. And I get it from a marketing standpoint, it's very effective. The problem that I have just as a healthcare provider is that people are making choices that I don't necessarily disagree with because it can be healthy for them, but they're making them for a reason. They're making the choice out of fear. And the problem with that, it's a slippery slope. And I don't want to say that going on any of these diets moves you closer to disordered eating, and I don't treat people with disordered eating, but a lot of my patients come to me with physical pain and they have disordered eating patterns. And I would say that most of them start with some type of restrictive diet that was done out of fear of something, where they're scared of carbs, or they're scared of seed oils, or they're scared of something. And I want to be clear, it's like, I don't think that I'm not saying the carnivore diet causes eating disorders, because it totally doesn't. I'm just saying, in general, when people get afraid and they start restricting, it's not a good path to go down. And I feel like, at least I'm thinking about the patients who I work with who also have disordered eating patterns. From what I know and from the conversations, they have all started that way. Not necessarily with the carnivore diet, but they've started with some type of fear or concern, and then some type of eating pattern that was restrictive. And carnivore diet is just the one we're talking about now, but a lot of these diets are like that. So I think a lot of times people will say, well, what do you recommend then? It's like, I don't necessarily disagree with what you're doing. It's just, I want to make sure that you're making the decisions with the knowledge and not with fear. And if you're making the choice and you're saying, I still think this is the best thing for me, then who am I to say that it's not? I mean, your blood work's going to tell us a lot, and your health longevity, but there are a lot of very fit, healthy people who are vegans. There are a lot of very fit, healthy carnivore people out there. And so I think it can be a great thing, but I think it's an interesting thing because we have those extreme. It seems like it's hard to find someone in the middle who's like, yeah, I just eat an adequate amount of protein. It's like, either they're freaked out about protein and they don't eat enough, or they're eating a ton of protein. And I would say you and I probably have selection bias, because people only come to us when they need help. So I'm not really seeing the people out there who are, in the middle feeling good.
And that's what you and I think, both promote, is just being in that middle, enjoying carbohydrates with fiber more often than carbohydrates without fiber, and protein and fat. And having all three of those at your meals keeps you feeling energetic and satisfied throughout the day. Taking any one of those out is going to be detrimental to your body generally, and taking one of those out may make you feel poorly. So it's the old moderation is really true. But again, I will support people if they choose to be on a more high protein diet and lower carbohydrate. I just want to make sure that they're getting the right nutrients they need, and modifying that intake a little bit so that they are getting fiber for their gut and they are getting antioxidants to prevent disease. That's my biggest problem with the carnivore or any of the high protein, low carb diets, is carbohydrates, whole grains, vegetables, beans, fruits have so many beneficial nutrients that help prevent and treat disease. I worry what will happen later on, long term, when someone is following a diet like that, to their health.
So to sum up for protein then, would you agree that protein is essential?
It should be the first thing. I feel like it should be the first thing you think about when you're planning your meal. Just like you said, prioritize the protein, then plan what carbs, what fiber, and everything you're going to have. I totally agree with that. Mm-hmm.
So protein is essential. You need those 9 essential amino acids that you cannot get from anything else other than food. It doesn't necessarily have to be from animal protein. In fact, there are a lot of benefits to eating sources of protein. I think that's a misconception that you can't get the complete amino acid profile from plants. That's not true. It takes a little bit more effort for some people. Some people, it's very intuitive and they do it quite well. You can still get the quantity from it. Those foods are also high in fiber, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and are exponentially better for you if you're concerned about cardiovascular disease. But in general, protein, you got to have it. You make sure you have enough. And then too much, I guess, is debatable whether or not it's bad or not. So after protein, what do you move on to next with somebody?
Typically move on to that whole vegetable fiber issue. You think about your protein, then I want you to think about fruits and vegetables, which is kind of easy to say, but thinking about the fiber, both in carbohydrates and in vegetables. So fiber is in any plant-based product. It's a compound our body doesn't digest. It moves right through our system. And because of that, it's very good for our gut health. Our gut microbiome and the bacteria that live in our gut, we need to support those and make them healthy. And fiber is one of the most important things that does that. And some of our highest sources of fiber are whole grains, beans, things like quinoa. Heavy hitters in the fruit area are pears and berries. Heavy hitters in vegetables are broccoli and cauliflower and peas and those types of things. But it's good to have a nice amount of fiber from both carbohydrate sources and vegetable and fruit sources. All of them have good nutrients that our bodies need. And I'm not saying that we should be eating mounds of pasta and mounds of carbohydrates, but we do want to eat small amounts and have that fiber in there. Fiber helps lower our cholesterol. It helps keep us full. When you have protein, you brought this up, protein and fiber together, you're going to stay pretty full, energized, keeps our blood sugar very stable when we eat fiber. So it's an important nutrient. That would be the next thing that I would talk about. And then I often give my patients or clients ways to increase that protein in their diet. We'll kind of go through how they eat and we'll say, hey, could you throw some chia seeds on top of that soup? Could you throw some hemp seeds or some nuts in that salad? And just kind of go through and figure out how to add how to add fiber to food, which it can be pretty simple.
Yeah, there's a study that I use with my students in class, and the sample size is too small, I think, to make it definitive. But I chose it because I feel like the results do replicate, or they do represent the overall body of research. And I chose it specifically because there's something very funny in the research. So I think it was done in a university hospital, and they went, and I could just picture this. And as I was reading through, there's one sentence in there that made me laugh out loud. And then I went back and reread it, and I started laughing as I was going through, because it's like, okay, they're in this university hospital and they want to test fiber. So they just grab a bunch of people, some grad students and faculty, staff, whatever. And they have 3 diets. And one of them would be what they would consider pre-agriculture. So really high, it's basically just fruits and vegetables. And then the next diet was most closely related to what we would consider a Mediterranean diet. So you have beans and different things like that. So they would say that's early agriculture kind of diet. And then they had the diet that they used in the hospital for high cholesterol. So the therapeutic diet. So I can imagine they just went and grabbed the registered dietitian, what do you give to this population of people? And they tested cholesterol, and then they tested fecal bulk, and then they looked at bile acid excretion and a couple other things. And when it all came out, the fruits and vegetable diet just crushed it. I mean, the cholesterol drop was huge. The fecal bulk went up incredibly, and their risk for colon cancer dropped drastically because of the fecal bulk. And the stats were crazy. And then the Mediterranean diet did pretty well too. The only diet that had no effect was the therapeutic diet. So I could imagine them getting the results in and sitting around the table, and they're just, okay, so just eating fruits and vegetables, pretty good, did really well. Mediterranean diet, which everyone can follow, did really well too. the diet that you came up with, the person who has a master's degree, who we pay to treat our patients, had literally no effect on cholesterol. And this is the diet that it was just like that observation. I wonder if that person got fired for that. I thought it was pretty funny. But the interesting thing was, so the people who were on the fruits and vegetable diet, 100% of their protein, if I remember correctly, came from plant sources. And then the Mediterranean diet, it was well over 50%. I would say it's probably 60 to 70% was plant protein. And then in the therapeutic diet, even though it was a therapeutic diet for cholesterol, I think it was less than 30% or somewhere around there. I'm not quoting these numbers right, but it was definitely less than 50% of the protein came from plant sources, which was fascinating. And the diets were pretty high in nuts also. They had them eating a ton of nuts because of fats and protein and fiber and everything. But that's one of those things that like I presented to students, because if you are concerned about heart disease, you really need to think about, it seems like the body of research would strongly suggest that even if you're going to keep eating animal sources of protein, that you should have a diet that is relatively high in fiber. Is that, and I picked that because I feel like with my limited experience, that really kind of goes in line with all the other studies, even though it was a very small study with a small sample size and they didn't really run it for that long. I still feel like it represented it. And I picked it specifically because I thought it was funny.
There's no doubt that high fiber diets lower cardiovascular risk, colon cancer risk, and insulin resistance and diabetes is kind of the other condition to add to that. There are studies and evidence that show without a doubt people on high fiber diets who have a history of diabetes in their families do not tend to get diabetes as quickly as people who do not follow plant-based or high fiber diets. And that's where this body of research has started with the plant-based. It starts with the Mediterranean diet because that is mainly plant-based proteins and fish, a little bit of fish, but very little meat. So that's good. That's a fun way to look at it. But absolutely, and fiber is the one thing that I would say the majority of people I see, I don't know about the people you're seeing, do not get enough of. And that is something that is easily fixed if they're willing to try and eat more plant-based foods and nuts and seeds, something you want to fix gradually. You don't want to go from eating 5 grams of fiber to 35 grams of fiber in a day. So I teach them how to do that. But that definitely, and in our nation as a whole, when you look at health, fiber is the one nutrient that across the board we are lacking in most people's diets. Men are supposed to have around 35 grams, by the way, and women should have 25 grams. Postmenopausal women, they're saying more like 30 and 35 grams. So big preventer of disease.
The fun thing about adding fiber to your diet is foods that are high in fiber are delicious for the most part, because this is where if you like comfort foods, you like beans and rice, or you like sourdough bread or things, peanut butter has fiber in it. And so and all these things I'm talking about also have a ton of protein in it. So you really realize like, wow, I'm getting a lot of what I need from not a ton of food.
And things that people don't think are good for them, like a baked potato has 6 grams of fiber in it. A baked sweet potato has 8 grams. So it's those foods that you think you shouldn't be eating as well. And I know you always made your chia seed little mixture in the morning. Chia seeds, you can make chia seed puddings, which are fantastic, which I know Chris has made with 2 or 3 tablespoons of chia seeds. And that's just a delicious snack to have in the day. And it has 12 grams of fiber in it. So fruits are delicious. A lot of people stay away from fruit though, because it has sugar in it. And it's not, we cannot compare sugar and fruit to sugar and cookies and candy. I cannot tell you how many of the clients I see do not eat fruit because they've been told it has sugar in it. Fruit has a source, as you know, of fiber and nutrients that are healthy for us and prevent disease, and it's delicious. So, because it is sweet, but our body metabolizes, though, in a way our body uses those very well. So, fiber can make your diet very interesting. And there are plenty of different ways to cook vegetables to make them better if you don't like vegetables. Another thing many people don't like. But when you actually teach people how to roast vegetables or how to add them to other foods and mix them, which is something we're going to do when we cook our meal today, they realize that I do like that. I've never had that. A lot of times adults haven't had vegetables since they were a kid. They hated it when they were a kid, so they haven't tried it as an adult. And if you can get adults to try that again, get them to like vegetables, it's pretty easy.
I feel that I feel like sometimes I laugh at things, and I shouldn't, because if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're like, well, I thought fruit was bad for me, and you believe this. If you think about it, and usually when you have these conversations, it's like, so you think the diabetic crisis in the United States is because people are eating too many apples? Like, people are just going to the store and they're ODing on raw oranges. They're just not it. When you think about it that way, it's just because if you were going to get all of your sugar from fruit, you can't eat that much. I try to eat more than 3 apples in a day. You could do it, but it's not sustainable. You're not going to have the taste for it. The same thing with most fruits. They're good, but you can't eat a ton of them. And if you do eat a ton of them, you don't want it the next day. Where it's not that way with other things. It's not that way with ice cream or cookies, and not that those things are bad, but it's just they're somewhat designed to get you to keep eating more and not to fill you up and not to provide what you need, because otherwise you wouldn't eat them. So I think it's an interesting thing, and I would imagine that there are certain conditions where if someone is severely diabetic and they're really having trouble managing their blood sugar, maybe you don't want them eating fruit for a period. I mean, I could see that there are probably scenarios for a limited amount of time you might restrict certain things because of a pathology that someone's going through.
But actually, even in that scenario, you just couple that protein or that fruit with protein. Seriously. And you will see when individuals' blood sugars are extremely high, if they would eat an apple by itself, it could affect it. But if they had that on top of a meal, it actually, when we look at their continuous glucose meters, it doesn't affect them. So, I mean, there are times when we really cut our carbohydrates down for a newly diagnosed diabetic, but even then, fruit can always fit, just because it has the nutrition and the nutrients that help that insulin resistance improve. So it's more just than how the blood sugar is going. It's the nutrition that helps decrease that insulin resistance. And I would always have them pair it with protein, though. If I had a patient with blood sugars running in the 300s, I would not say to have an apple by itself or a snack. You have that apple with peanut butter or a piece of cheese or some nuts. Yeah. So.
Well, how do you feel about glucose monitors for people who aren't diabetic? So you can just go get them. They're not really even that expensive. You probably go to Walgreens and pick one up. And then, because I feel like people will say, and this is something that I feel like the carnivore crew, and I don't want to, carnivore influencers, a large part of them have been promoting this for a long period of time. And I feel like it's misleading, because they'll say, look, if I check my glucose and if I eat certain things, if I eat bread, if I eat fruit, my blood sugar spikes. Therefore, it's not good for me. And, a lot of people, I think a lot of these influencers don't have a medical background. Some of them do, which is the really frustrating part. But, your blood sugar is supposed to spike when you eat something that has sugar in it. And then if you're not diabetic and you have an appropriate insulin response, I wouldn't be too concerned about how high it gets immediately after you eat something. It's where is it in an hour? If it has not gone back down, then there's probably something larger going on that we would need to look at. But there are, there are still cultures in the world where, 20% of their diet comes from raw honey. You know what I mean? Just because it's available and it's high calorie and it's delicious and they have access to it. But it's one of those things, they're not necessarily becoming diabetic because they're eating honey regularly. And I think that I run into it within the fitness community more than anything, where people are really trying to monitor their blood sugar. And I feel like if they don't have a pathology that would require that, and they haven't had that kind of support from a healthcare provider who's teaching them this is what it means, it can lead to some misunderstandings where people are starting to avoid fruit because they think, oh, well, it makes my blood sugar spike.
And that is, it's an appropriate physiologic response for our body, for our blood sugar to go up after we eat anything with carbohydrate, because carbohydrates are breaking down into glucose and they're entering our bloodstream. But like you said, we have a pancreas that produces the correct amount of insulin, and it will take care of it an hour later. Even if you have diabetes and you're trying to control your diabetes, your blood sugar is expected to be a little bit higher 1 to 2 hours after you eat than when you're fasting. And it's acceptable and it can still be okay. But like you said, it's when it's in the 200s and 300s an hour to 2 hours after we eat, that is when we need to worry about it. And I don't see any of that personally. Most of the people I work with, CGMs, have diabetes, but I see a lot of influencers. I don't know who there is. There's some guy that every day he posts a food. I'm eating a pear. This is what my blood sugar did. And it's just, of course it did. That's what our body is supposed to do. And I don't see much benefit for wearing those. What information is that giving you other than you're going to avoid any carbohydrate? Because any carbohydrate pretty much is going to raise your blood sugar at varying levels. So now that's something that drives me nuts, actually. Really drives me nuts, because then I have my diabetics see this and they call me and say, you told me I could eat fruit and I saw this guy without diabetes eating fruit. And I said, well, what does it do to you? Well, I'm okay, but it's just.
Okay, so you've got, let's say you're working with someone and they come in, they're feeling sluggish. You start to work on protein, they're feeling better. Move on very quickly. You're starting to work on fiber. Maybe they're starting to double dip and they're eating these whole unprocessed foods that are high in fiber, high in protein. So caloric intake's going down, starting to like the way they look, like the way they feel. What's next? How do you keep refining what would typically be, or is there a typical next step, or is it just vary depending on the person?
It always varies depending on the person. Everyone's pretty individual. But if things are going well, I will constantly assess, really just to make sure they're getting the nutrients that they need. We'll start looking at fat intake a little bit at that point, looking at their carb intake. I really watch to make sure people are getting enough calories. This is something we're seeing, and this is a deep topic to go into, and I don't want to get there, but I see a lot of people that are on some of the GLP-1 medications now, which lower your appetite quite a bit, to where people sometimes are only eating 800 or 1,000 calories a day. And when I see somebody that I've been seeing, even if they're not on a GLP-1, often when you start eating that protein and you get to feeling better and you're liking how you look, they often will start eating less and less and less. And that's a problem, because when you're not getting enough calories or even enough carbohydrate, the protein you eat is not used for your muscle mass at that point. Those amino acids need to be used for calories and for energy. So if you're someone that's eating, let's say 100 grams of protein a day, but only 1,000 or 1,200 calories, that protein is being used for additional calories. It is not used. So I always be careful with that. And that is kind of what I see. People are feeling good and doing well. And sometimes those calories, believe it or not, when they get too low, that impedes how you're going to lose weight as well. So again, I want to make sure people are eating fat. I want to make sure they're eating a little bit of carbohydrate and protein, all three of those things.
It does. I love the GLP-1 topic because it's so polarizing and almost religious at this point. People are taking sides. But the funny thing is that from within the alternative health space, something that I've heard a lot is it's the new opioid, because it's going to have that kind of effect. And I think about it, and it's kind of funny because I have needed opioids a couple times in my life, and I am so happy they exist. So happy they exist, because There are some times when the pain from trauma, physical trauma, is so much that you just need that turned off. And with anything that has an effect in an extreme in one side, it's going to have the potential for the other side as well. And I think GLP-1s are the same thing. There's like, for people who are like, hey, you're about to lose a foot and you might die of heart disease and you have obesity and we have to do something quickly. And you are acknowledging that I cannot control. I have this I have to eat, like this uncontrollable urge. So other than locking someone in a cell and restricting food, how are you going to send them back to their everyday life? So the fact that we now have this medication that could potentially save people's lives, obviously there's misuse of it going on, which I would say we need to crack down on. But I find the comparison, I don't know if it's completely inaccurate, but I think it's kind of funny that it's like, this is going to save people. It could. It probably already has and already is. And the interesting thing is that, that they're like, wow, a lot of the muscle mass, or a lot of what they're losing is muscle mass. And it's one of those things that I think when you look at research, I think there's a lot of cardio research out there as opposed to strength training, not because cardio is better, it's just easier to test. It's hard to take 1,000 people and have them back squat, but you can put them on a bike. And so when you're doing this research where you're really trying to see what happens with like a GLP-1, for example, you're not necessarily going to add in a bunch of variables to test right away. And it's relatively new. And I know that there's research going on now where they're saying like, well, look, what happens with cohorts of people when they're on these medications and they have routine strength and conditioning? Do we still see the same muscle loss? And I follow a couple of physicians who use GLP-1s regularly, cardiologists and just weight loss physicians. And they're pretty adamant that in practice, when they have people resistance train and they're on the meds, that they don't see those. I think that the research maybe just hasn't been published. It's just we haven't gotten that far yet with research, but I think it's kind of interesting.
I have seen that actually with several of my clients. They have gone to a trainer, started that muscle resistance, started the strength training, and I don't have a study to measure their muscle mass, but they look muscular. You can see muscles, and they don't have that wasted appearance that many people do. And because they're strength training, their appetites are a little bit better and they're eating adequate amounts of food. And not everybody on GLP-1s goes down that track where they're not eating much. And you can adjust the meds to make it work for them. But that's something I look for. Whether they're on the meds or not, I always make sure they're eating enough, because we know that can come back to haunt you, including with these GLP-1s. When that appetite comes back, if you weren't eating enough during that time you lose weight, then you're going to gain that weight really rapidly back, as you would if you weren't even on medication and just not eating enough. So
I feel like this is the third summer we're going to run Fit Club at the college. And I feel like this is probably maybe like the first summer where I suspect we're going to have quite a few people who are on those meds. I don't know in the past that we have, just because in 6 months I get to know people, but I know that there are some people who have gone through the program who are now on GLP-1s and doing quite well. And so I suspect that maybe there are people listening to this right now who are thinking about, or have already joined Fit Club and are participating, and they're on those meds and probably have these questions. And I think for them, working with us, they should know that there's no stigma here. That I think it's probably a really positive thing, just like opioids, as long as it's not misused.
I think it's a very positive thing, because there are some individuals, based on hormones in their body, based on hereditary factors, losing weight is very, very difficult. And there are people that have a lot of that food noise in their head, whether it's from dealing with stress or some borderline disordered eating. This medicine helps people be able to control that, and then they can learn how to eat well and how to take care of themselves, because it knocks off that, we call it food noise, that is telling us we need to eat even if we're not hungry. So I am all for them. I think they're the right people, appropriate people, those people that need it. So I think it's a good thing.
And I'm just going to clarify, because my license is tied to the fact that I don't prescribe medication. So when people are listening to this, I am not saying that you should or should not take any meds. What I'm saying is there are pros and cons to every medication, and those are best discussed with a physician who would be prescribing them. But I would recommend, and I do recommend to all my patients when they're skeptical of medications, that not necessarily that they go take them, but they go ask questions and get their questions answered and listen with an open mind, so that at least if they decide to not take or to take, that they feel good about that decision because they've had their questions answered. And I feel like sometimes people just take medication blankly without asking questions, which is not always a great thing to do because you want to understand. And other people will actively avoid medication. I had a woman not too long ago who was diagnosed with osteoporosis and is not taking any meds. And I was kind of curious about it because I was like, well, out of curiosity, did your doctor recommend it? And she said, yeah, he did, but I don't want to take them. And I was like, oh, what was his reaction to that? And she was like, wasn't too happy about it. And I said, yeah, out of curiosity, like, what's the reason? And it was just a mistrust of the medical community. There's a general distrust, and it's like, okay, I can sympathize and empathize with that. There's a lot of stuff that we're not sure of. But then I just asked some basic questions. What are the side effects that you're afraid of? And she couldn't answer those questions. And I said, okay, so you are lacking the basic knowledge of the med. I can't give it to you. I don't know. I don't prescribe medication. But what I would recommend is that you go back to your physician and you ask him, what are the pros? How many are there? What are the cons? Because I would say that if you have osteoporosis and you fall and break a hip because of your bones and you're elderly, that's a huge risk. I think the statistics are not great about how many years you have left after that. I don't know what those are off the top of my head, but now if you understand that risk and you say, I still don't want to take the meds, then okay, that's great. But if you really got to think about the pros and cons, and I think a lot of people who are anti-medication, they don't get their questions answered, or they didn't ask questions. And a lot of times physicians, they're so busy, they're not going to necessarily offer more information if you don't ask. But I've never been in a situation where I've said, because I take meds, where I've talked to my doctor and like, can you just spend a couple more minutes walking me through this? Because I want to make sure. I've never had anyone not do that, or at least have like a nurse practitioner come in if they didn't have time to come in and give me that information or schedule another appointment. So, and I realize there are probably people out there who have had negative experiences. But I think just having the general knowledge of both sides is only going to help you make that informed decision rather than just going with the flow. Because you're either going with I'm just taking it because they said to take it, which may not be the best thing. It may be a good thing. Or like, I'm not going to take that because so and such influencer and my friend said that this was bad. And it's like, well, that's not a good reason either. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. And if you're not making that informed decision, and this happens with protein, it happens with fiber, it happens with carbs, it happens with seed oils, it happens with all this other stuff that's going on right now that people are just like, if you're like, well, why are you making that decision? Just give me your sales pitch. And a lot of times they look at me with like a blank stare because they haven't thought that deeply about it. It's like, okay, well, you may be making a good decision, but you might not be. Like, you just kind of made a choice. So let's think about it. But I don't know. That's why I think the GLP-1 thing is so interesting, because it's so heated right now. So heated. And I'm so curious to see how it pans out. But it seems like the Maha vibe, or at least people who are super into Maha are usually not like, yay, GLP-1s. It's usually like the opposite of that. So I think that's an interesting shift in topic. What are your opinions on Make America Healthy Again?
Well, I think you and I do a really nice job of making America healthy. I do think we need to be very careful about the shift against actual evidence-based science that's going on. The seed oil information may have some truth to it, but it's overplayed. Seed oils may not be the best thing for us to eat in large quantities. And I think we need to understand that these seed oils are being discussed in the form of being in highly processed foods like orange dusted Cheetos and Doritos and Ho-Hos and Twinkies. And we know those foods are causing problems, but is it really the seed oils that are doing that? Historically, there's a lot of evidence that shows us vegetable oils, which have polyunsaturated fats, do have a decreased risk for cardiovascular disease, decreased risk for mortality from cancer. I think that they are useful in most people's diets if those individuals can't afford to buy some of the healthier oils, such as olive oil and avocado. So that's one point of the MAHA part. But I think it's getting away from science, and that concerns me, quite frankly. And I know there are research and science supporting many of the tenets in the MAHA. And as you know, many of the things that we hear on social media, there are these small studies, but to just look at science that we've had for years and years and years and research that we've done, things that I know, I've been doing this for 35 years, I can see what works in my patients. And seed oils are not what's causing my patients to die of heart attacks and strokes and heart disease. So that's about what I'm going to say. I think what they're proposing to do is needed. I think it's going about it the wrong way. I think our school lunches are atrocious for children. I think they need to be healthy. I don't think we should take those away, though, for low-income people. I think we should have programs to make that food healthy. I think we need to have programs to educate people how to eat. We need to talk with food manufacturers and get some of the junk out of our food. Or we need to make locally grown food more available to communities, and change pricing on foods so that low-income families don't have to rely on chips and Doritos and boxed macaroni and cheese. They can afford to buy eggs and cheese and fresh meat. So I do recognize there's a problem. I just don't think what I'm hearing is the right way to go about it. I wish they would invest more money and time in fixing that problem, which is huge. How do we fix this? I mean, the whole manufacturing market of food would need to be changed, but that's what I think is worth doing it, because other countries do not have, not all other countries, but many other countries don't produce the kind of junk we put on our grocery shelves, and they do not have the kind of disease that we do. So if we could do it a different way than what we're doing now, and taking the food dyes out, I do agree with that. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Certainly don't have a solution for that, but maybe address it a different way.
Well, I can tell you're married to an attorney, because you definitely didn't give me anything spicy out of there. But yeah, I think you, I don't think there's anyone, regardless of your dietary dogma or your political affiliation, that can look at the health of the United States and be like, yeah, we're doing a good job, whether it's the way we do healthcare or really anything. We're not, even though life expectancy is better than it used to be, and there are a lot of good things, and this is a good time to be alive, we're not doing great in certain areas, and maybe even getting worse in certain areas. So I think we could all probably, regardless of our opinion, we can agree that things need to change. And one of the worst things you can do if you know things need to change is to keep things the same. So for better or worse, MAHA is going to change something. And it's, you know, when you introduce something new and you say, I'm going to change this, something can happen. Like things could get better, or things could get worse, or things could not change at all. So, but either way, anything that happens, if you're thinking about it critically, it gives you information. So if Maha gets rid of seed oils and America gets healthier, great. If America gets less healthy, well, we would learn something, and we would need, as long as we don't repeat that, whoever's in office next would need to look at that critically and be like, okay, we can't go back to what was before Maha, but obviously Maha missed the mark here. And then what we can do if nothing changes is you sit there and you think, okay, maybe we didn't run the experiment long enough, or maybe we were barking up the wrong tree, which is kind of your point, is like, we need to make changes, but is it really the change that we need to make? And I think the seed oils is interesting because processed foods that are high in seed oils are also high in sugar, high in salt, they're higher in calories because you eat more of them. They're lower in fiber, lower in protein, lower in nutrients. So they're the exact opposite of what you'd want to be eating. So if you just take out the seed oil and you put in some other type of oil and you haven't changed anything else, will America objectively be healthier? And I think at best we could hope we don't get less healthy. And I think that's best case scenario, because what I've looked at with seed oils and the research is that if you compare them to saturated fat, they do quite well. I'm not saying they're great, but they do better than saturated fat. So if we're going to go into fast food restaurants and put beef tallow in, the calories are going to go up, and our risk for cardiovascular disease is probably going to go up as well. And that's not good. So, and I think I can agree with you on the food dyes, but I wonder, like, getting rid of food dyes, is that really going to move the needle? Is that something that like, yeah, there's no nutritional value, I guess dump them, but are we really going to spend time? There's just so many other things that we can do. I don't know that Maha is going to have that kind of positive effect. I hope they do. I'm hopeful, but I'm also very, very skeptical. So I wish them the best, but I don't know. I don't know if it's going to work out the way we want it to. But as I said before, something has to change. So the fact that they're doing something different, I think, is a really positive thing. And I'm just curious to see what happens, I guess. I don't know.
I am too, because something does have to change. I totally agree with that.
Anything else about basic nutrition?
I think we've covered it. Fill your plates with produce, plants, some meat proteins. If you want some meat proteins, some animal proteins, dairy proteins, don't be afraid of carbohydrates. They provide good energy. They have good sources of fiber and nutrition. And don't avoid sugar entirely. Sugar is something that I'm certainly not going to say is healthy for us, but it's not toxic. It's not going to kill you unless you are eating excessive amounts every day. I just always like to make that point, because that's the other thing people come and see me and say is, well, I've given up sugar, so I think that's going to help me. And that doesn't last long for a lot of people. There are people that don't need to have sweets, but you have to have some joy from food as well. And I never would advocate for people to give up things and foods that they really like. So it really is moderation, and it's just balance between all three macronutrients.
Well, I think one important thing that I will say for people who are thinking about working with us, especially if you're listening to this or watching this and Fit Club hasn't started, or maybe this is in years to come and you're thinking about joining Fit Club and you're working with us, or we've moved on to other things, or you just see us out in town and you are deciding whether or not you would like to engage. I'll speak for Denise a little bit because I know her. She's not going to judge you. You're not going to judge anyone. And so we're open, and you're definitely open to people disagreeing with you and still working with you, as long as you guys can find a common ground. We don't have, it's not all or nothing. And I feel like it's the same thing with me. Not specifically about nutrition, because I'm not really, if you want to come work with me and you don't want to change your diet, I don't care. I mean, I care, but I'm not going to kick you out as a patient. And it's the same thing as, like, even if I think you should be strength training or doing something else, if you don't want to do it, I'm okay with that as well. But we just have to find, as two people working together, like, okay, what do we both agree that is going to help you, that you're willing to do, and that I think, is possibly is going to have a positive effect, even if it's a small effect. And if we can find that one common ground, we can disagree on 99% of things. We can still work together. So I think people find some of our opinions as off-putting, but there used to be a time, especially I even remember as a kid, when people of different beliefs could still be friends and have conversations and work together. And I grew up as a conservative in Southern California, and in the 90s, 80s and 90s, and I don't remember it ever being that big of an issue, even though most of my friends and their families were liberal, and we were very obviously a conservative family. And I missed that. And so I feel like I have strong opinions and you have strong opinions, but something that I really have always appreciated and why I send a lot of people to you is that, even if you don't agree with someone 100%, there's still some type of common ground, and we can work together and get something done, which I feel like is maybe something we're losing in society a little bit, or hopefully we'll get back. Anything else? Okay, that's it for episode 27 of the Build Beyond podcast. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Denise Lovanger. If you're looking for Denise's contact info, it's all listed in the description, or you can reach out to me and I can put you in touch with her. All right, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you look forward to the next episode.